Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're sitting. My name is Chad Martin, and I'm the Practice Director for VSS, Virtualization, Server Storage, and Cloud for TIG. And in this webinar, we're going to take a look on why it's critical to have a strong hybrid infrastructure strategy, especially when you're looking at migrating workloads to the cloud. Now, I'm going to start off by defining hybrid infrastructure or hybrid cloud, talk about the benefits of it, speak about security and the importance of security being profound and top of mind. I want to look at the consequences of having a bad migration strategy. We're going to look at explaining TIG's migration methodology as well as TIG's managed migration services. And then we're going to conclude with a brief overview of TIG as a company and how we help customers every day with their cloud initiatives. So grab you a cup of coffee, and I'll see you on the next slide. So a hybrid infrastructure can be simply defined as an IT environment that contains some form of on-prem infrastructure in combination with public cloud workloads. A hybrid infrastructure is composed of a combination of on-premise data centers, private clouds, and public clouds. These enterprise systems and applications can be deployed on any of these environments depending on the strategic business need, the technical requirements, and the required outcome. So let me give you an example of what I'm saying here. An organization might want to save costs by moving the majority of its business processes to the cloud or a hybrid cloud infrastructure. An organization with a rapidly scaling workforce might want to implement a cloud-based employee management solution which will be powered by data housed in legacy systems. Another example would be an organization might recognize that it needs to make certain applications available to employees to access on their personal devices. In these scenarios, it becomes important to think about how to manage systems and applications across a hybrid environment. There is a network connection, albeit a VPN connection or direct connection with an internet service provider, between the on-prem network and the public cloud network. So you have to take that in consideration when building your strategy. Now, you may be caught up in a conversation where someone is talking about multi-cloud and they're talking about hybrid. And sometimes people use those terms interchangeably. But let me define multi-cloud real quick for you. A multi-cloud architecture is when an organization is using more than one cloud service provider. For example, an organization may want to leverage AWS and some of the features and functionality of Azure. Now, you may be asking yourself, why would any organization want to do that? Just pick one and call it a day. Well, there are some features in AWS that do not exist in Microsoft Azure. So you want to leverage your CSPs and be smart with your strategy and determine what are the best cloud service providers to use. Now, hybrid, obviously, you're using your on-prem infrastructure with these multi-cloud architectures, or utilizing AWS and Microsoft together with your on-prem. So really, multi-cloud can be hybrid, but it doesn't have to be. You could just leverage a couple cloud service providers out there without having a connection back into your on-prem virtual infrastructure. So what we refer to as hybrid is both on-prem and off-prem, and multi-cloud is utilizing multiple cloud service providers. So I hope that makes sense from an architectural perspective. As you can see by the image depicted here, 81% of enterprises have a multi-cloud strategy. And that makes sense because organizations will leverage the features and functionality of the clouds that can meet a business need. And 51% of enterprises have a hybrid cloud. So they're utilizing their on-prem infrastructure, and there's a connection, if it's a VPN connection or a direct connection to the public cloud, they're utilizing that connection. So I hope that's kind of made sense to you, but from a multi-cloud perspective, the majority of enterprises out there are using multiple cloud service providers. Now, you can't stop the landslide to the cloud, and frankly, you probably shouldn't. The growth of cloud and the decline of the data center is an enterprise reality. As a matter of fact, it's predicted by 2020, just a couple of years, Companies will spend about the same amount of money on cloud, hosting, and traditional infrastructure services. I mean, organizations, they want the agility and flexibility and not the hassle and expense of maintaining an on-premise data center, which is why most organizations will want some sort of cloud solution. But for a variety of reasons, including compliance and data security, delivery models, etc., not every company can move entirely to the cloud. That's why you're seeing hybrid infrastructure more and more today. That mix of cloud, public cloud, and on-premise infrastructure. So if you're thinking about moving some or most of your applications and systems to the cloud, a hybrid infrastructure is the right choice. The biggest concern around a hybrid cloud is one word: security. 51% of IT leaders cite security as the biggest challenge in adopted hybrid cloud. As a matter of fact, there are 5 challenges that hybrid cloud security has to address. For example, encryption. The fundamental private-public architecture of a hybrid cloud model requires the nearly constant transfer of data from one cloud environment to another. Public cloud computing resources are capable of powering the resource-intensive analytic programs that deliver valuable insights, but they need data to work with. Most of the data comes from the private cloud side of a hybrid deployment. So theoretically, a private managed cloud should offer the highest level of security, whether it's housed in physical, on-site, or co-located servers, or maintained in a VPN. However, in order to leverage the computing resources of the public cloud, the private cloud must make its data available. So when data is transmitted from one cloud environment to another, it becomes vulnerable. Eavesdropping, cyber attacks, DDoS, for example, for that hybrid cloud, that bypass typical authentication security measures. Encryption is the best way to protect this data, making it all but impossible to access it even if it falls in the wrong hands in the event of a security breach. Another challenge is compliance. Ensuring compliance with industry standards and government regulations on the handling of sensitive information is one of the most important tasks facing any IT infrastructure. Data leakage. Sensitive data can be compromised in a variety of ways. When corrupted, destroyed, inappropriately accessed, or simply lost, a data breach of any kind can spell disaster for an organization. The hybrid cloud vulnerabilities here extend beyond the provider, however. In a workplace where people can access customer data with their own devices through the public portion of the hybrid cloud, organizations must account for the potential security risk posed by those devices, which may or may not be secured or connected to other networks. Cloud service level agreements, SLAs. Setting up a hybrid cloud model necessarily means giving up some measure of control. In addition to security concerns, organizations need to pay close attention to the terms of a public cloud provider's SLA, which establishes those terms and guarantees, conditions of the service they're providing. A critical factor here is server uptime and availability. And the last, human error. Unfortunately, all the security protocols and legal agreements in the world are often powerless to prevent simple human error. We see it every day. The research has shown that for all the threats posed by cyber attacks, more than half of all data breaches can be traced back to one simple thing: human error. So security is the biggest concern around hybrid cloud. But with a strong strategy going into a hybrid infrastructure, you can alleviate a lot of these concerns. Now, with this quick adoption to a hybrid infrastructure comes some security risk, as we've discussed. Now, how can you make a cloud a secure extension of your network, a public cloud? Now, existing security controls such as authentication or authorization, you'll hear people talk about identity management, they will need to work in both private and public clouds. To integrate a hybrid cloud security protocol, there are really two options. You either replicate controls in both clouds and keep security data synchronized, or use some form of identity management service that provides a single service to systems running in either cloud. So you have to allocate sufficient time during your planning and implementation phases to address what could be fairly complex integration issues. So there is a way to secure that network, but here's where that strategy is very, very important and why it's critical, because you can open up yourself to a lot of security vulnerabilities if you don't take the time and plan early when extending that network. So let's discuss briefly a few, this is a very small list, of the hybrid cloud security concerns that are prevalent today. There's a general elevated risk due to having more exposure. Remember, you're moving workloads to the cloud. There's that network connection there. There could be some eavesdropping going on. So there's more exposure that you have to take in consideration when migrating those workloads in a hybrid cloud architecture. Data ownership and sovereignty. You know, you may run into an issue where you store data in a particular availability zone in a cloud, for example, that you may not own the data once you move it there. So you've got to do your research with the cloud service providers and understand where your data is actually sitting, because you may run into some of those data ownership issues. Now, you have to ensure security policies are extended to the cloud. I can't emphasize this enough. The cloud service provider is not going to provide you the same level of security like you have internal to your network and internal to your system. So the organization has to ensure that they're extending those security policies to the cloud where their data exists and where those systems are running. Administrative errors, you got to take that into consideration. We are human at the end of the day, and human error has to be taken into account. We spoke about that briefly earlier. Data loss, are we actually backing up this data? Does the data need to be backed up? Are we ensuring that the customer data that we have out in the cloud is protected? You know, if it's a healthcare system, are there some HIPAA regulations we need to be worried about? Or if it's some credit card transactions, do we have the PCI compliance taken care of? So this is just a few of the concerns we have to take in consideration. But that's why you need to have a solid strategy when looking at a hybrid cloud architecture. Now, there are other hybrid cloud concerns you need to take into account aside from security. For example, vendor lock-in. Today's enterprises and organizations must have an integration strategy that seamlessly unites applications and systems deployed, whether on-prem or out in the cloud. And you got to be careful for vendor lock-in. You don't want to put a system in place or solution where you're locked in and you're unable to move from it. It's just too rigid, and you're going to have to re-engineer some things. Secondly, you want to make sure you've got visibility across all platforms, on-prem and in the cloud, especially if you have a multi-cloud architecture where you're utilizing AWS and Microsoft Azure with your on-prem infrastructure. So that visibility is extremely important. And I can't emphasize the importance of taking the time to optimize your workloads prior to moving those workloads or applications or systems to the public cloud. You don't want to end up over-provisioning and overpaying. That would defeat the purpose of you moving that workload to the cloud. So these are just a few other concerns to think about when putting your strategy together. So what are the consequences of a bad cloud migration strategy? Well, first and foremost, it's going to be extremely costly, painful, and time-consuming if there's any workload re-engineering that needs to be done. That's why it's important to do assessments ahead of time and proper planning as you put your strategy together. Overpayment, this is a big deal. You have to take the time to optimize those workloads prior to moving them. You don't want to pay more for memory and CPUs than you're paying for your on-prem solution, your on-prem cloud. Complexity infrastructure management. I mean, if you're not taking the time to understand how you're going to manage that public cloud with your on-prem private cloud, you can add all sorts of complexities. The security blind spots and the security vulnerabilities that you're opening yourself up to by not doing security assessments and understanding how those cloud service providers tie into your internal network. Persistent administrator errors. You know, it's important that the team, the management team, the IT team, whatever you want to call it, you need to make sure they understand, whoever's managing these environments, they understand exactly what their account does in the cloud. All sorts of things can happen without having those controls in place. And last but not least, intellectual property loss. Yes, intellectual property loss. Just to give you a real quick case in point, there was an employee who built an application. He put in his credit card information. He wanted to leverage some development features out in one of the cloud service providers, and he made this wonderful app. The company and business loved it. They pushed it out to production, and a few months later, he took another job and left. Well, the company needed to access that application to maybe upgrade it and modify it, and they couldn't get access to it because he was using a personal account. So you got to be very, very, very careful when you start setting up these hybrid clouds and when you're migrating things to the cloud or when you're developing things in the cloud, that the controls are in place and that you understand, who's responsible for what in terms of who's responsible for that public cloud security, who's responsible for accessing that public cloud. Is that account in the public cloud associated with our organization, or is someone using their personal email address and standing up an account where we have intellectual property residing? So all of these need to be taken into account, and these are some consequences of a bad cloud migration strategy, but we can overcome them. So let's talk about TIG's workload migration methodology and managed migration service. So we talked about the consequences of having a bad cloud migration strategy, and TIG's workload migration methodology can help customers alleviate a lot of those issues. We first start off with an assessment, where we actually come in and we find out exactly what that application or system does, what that workload entails. If it's a 3-tier architecture, for example, utilizing a web server and a database and an app server, we want to understand all the interdependencies of that application or that stack before we decide to move it to the cloud. Now, the migration service, the managed migration service that we provide, is a software as a service solution that's built in the cloud, and it can move workloads from a source to a destination or target. And we really don't care, where that workload resides. It could be in a private cloud on-prem. It could be running on a bare metal server. It could actually be in another public cloud. It can be out in Azure or AWS. And we're able to leverage our tool and move those workloads to where you want them to be. You may want to move them back on-prem from a public cloud. You may decide, it's cheaper to run that workload in AWS than it is in Microsoft Azure. Our tool can certainly do that. Or you may want to move a bare metal server out to the cloud. We can virtualize that and put it on any cloud of your choice. So it's important that you understand how our workload migration methodology works and how we have a methodology that we adhere to where we want to go through an assessment and discovery phase so we can understand what exactly the workload is doing, and then we can move to a design phase and implementation phase to move those workloads. So that's how the TIG managed migration services work in conjunction with our migration methodology. So TIG has experience on both sides of this cloud equation. We've actually built infrastructure for cloud service providers. We've built the networks. We've architected a solution. We've helped enterprises move to the cloud. where we sit down with customers almost daily, it seems like, talking about their cloud initiative and coming up with a good strategy built around security, all the things that we've talked about, optimizing workloads, things of that nature. And we have successfully migrated workloads to the cloud. Now, we've also learned from seeing organizations doing it wrong. And that's why I can say we really have experience on both sides. If you don't have that strategy that's critical to a hybrid architecture, you're setting yourself up for failure. You just are. And we do see that. So it's very important that you understand that we have our software as a solution migration service, and it works flawlessly. But we do understand that without doing the proper assessments and understanding the workloads and how those line of business applications actually work, could potentially cause a lot of problems in the long run. So it's nice to know that we do have experience on both sides of that equation, and we can assist. So now that you've heard of the consequences of having a bad strategy, you understand how TIG has really seen both sides of the cloud migration equation. You've heard about the workload migration methodology and our software as a service, TIG Managed Migration Service. Now I want to kind of walk you through briefly on a case study where we actually took an on-prem booking application to the cloud. Now, remember back on our methodology, we like to make an assessment or take an assessment and make sure we understand all the interdependencies of the application. Now, in this particular scenario, the booking company not only wanted to migrate the application to the cloud, but they wanted to transform that application utilizing a SaaS model, software as a service. So it wasn't just moving that workload to the cloud. It was actually transforming that application and moving it together. When we were actually able to do some CSP assessments and do some Java testing and segmentation and things of that nature to determine the best public cloud or cloud service provider to use. And we were able to manage that entire migration from start to finish. So this was a really big deal for the customer and TIG in partnership together, being able to help this booking company migrate an entire application and transform that application through application modernization to a software as a service model in the public cloud. Really good case study. So allow me to talk a little bit about TIG. We have a 36-year history. We're based out of San Diego, California. We're a global trusted advisor. We are a financially strong minority-owned small business with 22 locations across the country, 11 strategically located ISO-certified integration facilities. We deliver a comprehensive range of solutions, products, and services with a strong ecosystem with our partners. We focus on helping clients map business goals to a comprehensive digital strategy. We want to move from an IT transformation to a digital transformation journey with our customers, and we want to partner with them throughout the process. We want to help create those intelligent, simple, user-intuitive, secure business tools for them to be successful. I mentioned that strong partner ecosystem earlier, with Dell EMC, VMware, Microsoft, HPE, and many, many more. We have a client engagement methodology that we adhere strictly to. You heard me mention it briefly about driving with assessments, where we do deep dive discoveries to understand your line of business applications, how you conduct work, and we incorporate a PMO, project management office, to work with our account execs and engineering staff to make sure those projects are completed in a timely fashion, and they're not only meeting expectations of our customers, but they're exceeding those expectations. We take a comprehensive approach to digitization, so we have expertise across IT, finance, operations, et cetera. And last but not least, we are built on and driven by diversity. So all in all, TIG is a very, very solid company. I'm proud to be an employee of TIG, and we really have a lot to offer, and we really are the best value resource out there from a consultant perspective. Well, folks, that brings us to the end of this presentation. I hope it's been informative for you. I know it was a very high-level discussion around having a strong strategy for a hybrid infrastructure or a hybrid cloud. I'm now going to open up the floor for any questions you may have.